Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 1 of Latitude's podcast series focusing on Americans seeking second citizenship options. On this episode, we have both our managing director of Latitude, Christopher Willis, and Will Garner, Latitude's strategic partner and US-based lawyer. Hosted on The Tom Woods Show, a 12-time New York bestselling author, exploring the dual citizenship and European residency options abroad that many high net worth Americans are now considering given the current social and political climate in the country. Please enjoy.
Let me start with a basic question for those of us who do not specialize in this. And it's so basic, it's so basic, but it's got to be asked. I want to know about when we dealing with immigration and second residences, can you sort out the difference between being a permanent resident and being a citizen and stuff like that, like what these different terms mean?
Absolutely, Tom, and thanks for having us on the show today. And it's a great question you have because there is an important distinction between residency and citizenship. And the programs that I'll discuss with you today are programs that you can achieve through investment. So basically for residency, this means that you're given permanent status to live and work, study in a certain country, but it doesn't give you the right to a passport, which many people is the end game for many people. So and each country will vary slightly in terms of what is required to obtain residency and how long the residence period is before you qualify for citizenship. Other programs, however, have a direct pathway to citizenship, again, through investment. And if you go through that process, you can acquire citizenship in another country in as little as 3 months. So it's attractive to a lot of people who are looking for a quick solution in terms of having access to another jurisdiction, whether it's as a resident or as a citizen. And as we discuss this further, we'll look at some of the motivations as to why people are looking to do this and what the benefits would be.
What do you mean through investment?
If we look at immigration policies around the world, they have a variety of different ways. You've got your humanitarian refugee classes, you've got your economic classes, which is like your skilled workers, for example. You're going to have family classes, spouses and such like being sponsored. And then under the economic classes, you have investors. So this is a separate subclass of investment that allows people to qualify for status by virtue of making an investment into the country. Now, the citizenship programs, it's essentially a straight donation, or you purchase approved real estate. That's the vehicle that allows you to qualify for the economic citizenship. So in summary, it's one of the immigration streams that allows people to gain status in a certain country.
Well, okay, geez, this just goes to show how little I know about this. I wouldn't even have considered this topic, to be honest with you, because I've had people ask me, why don't you do an episode on, let's say, maybe not exactly what we're talking about, but very close. Like, what would be the top countries for somebody in the United States to consider moving to if, whatever hit the fan in the U.S.? And I just kind of felt like, well, that could be a decent topic, but I personally would feel like a fish out of water in any country other than the U.S., and I just would never consider doing it. Mm-hmm. Now, to this day, I still wouldn't because I don't want to uproot my kids. But if I didn't have my kids, I actually would seriously be considering leaving at this point. And I've never in my life felt that way. But right now, I just feels like with everything going on and the absolute chaos and the bitterness that half the country feels toward the other half, it's exhausting after a while. And enough's enough. After a while, I think, yeah, I know Europe has left-wingery too, but I just feel like it just wouldn't be a constant fight in my face 24 hours a day. So I am actually much, much more sympathetic to this idea. So can we actually start with, given that you work in this area, what are the countries that you see Americans most commonly moving to, and what do you think is the attraction of those places?
Well, I mean, your point is well taken. Americans are very proud to be American and everything that the country offers. And I don't think that's ever going to change. You're going to have a small percentage that eventually renounce, so they say, look, thanks very much, I'm done, and I've got a citizenship somewhere else. So, whether it's for lifestyle, whether it's for tax reasons, they decide to renounce from the U.S. But the majority don't. The majority will still maintain their U.S. status, but they want to be able to have the option to go somewhere else. And this option is becoming critical now for the reasons that you're explaining, in terms of, the current volatile situation that's in the US. So, if something hits the fan and they say, look, I don't have time to wait. I want to get on a plane tonight and I want to go to country A. I need to know that I have status to get there. Because what you've, been reading, the value of a US passport as it relates to travel has diminished greatly. You can't get to Canada. You can't get to Europe. You can't even get to the Bahamas. They're closing their borders to American citizens. However, if you had a second citizenship, for example, then you could use that citizenship to afford you the right to travel and to get access to these different jurisdictions. And, there's many reasons why, again, people would want to do that, whether it's security, whether it's for healthcare, whether it's, the pandemic. We have a lot of people actually looking at the Cayman Islands as a jurisdiction saying, look, if I don't want to be in the US because the pandemic is too great and there's the civil unrest and there's all this, I want to go and sit somewhere where it's peaceful, where it's quiet, where there's got excellent healthcare and my family is safe and secure, right? So that's where somewhere like Cayman is becoming quite interesting for many people. They buy a nice piece of real estate and they can hang out there while the world's sort of going crazy around them. So those are some of the reasons why people are looking at it from the US. To get back to your original question of which countries could they go to, again, it depends a little bit on the motivation of the client. Are they looking for residence? Are they looking for citizenship? What's their time scale and how much do they want to invest? So like with a lot of anything in life, you get what you pay for, right? And so if you wanted to go top end, you're looking at somewhere like Cyprus, where you're going to spend €2.5 million and you can have European citizenship in the space of about 6 months. Below that, you're looking somewhere like Malta, where you're going to be spending about 1.2 million, and it's going to take about 18 months or so to get your citizenship there. Then if you look at the other side of the spectrum, you look at the Caribbean countries, there's 5 Caribbean countries currently that offer citizenship by investment programs. And for as little as 100,000 US as a donation, you can acquire citizenship in those countries, in the space of about 3 months. And, just for clarity, those countries are St. Kitts and Nevis, Antigua and Barbuda, St. Lucia, Grenada, and Dominica. And, they're all well-established programs and have a pretty refined process. So it's a relatively straightforward application for someone applying from the United States.
Wow. Now, I've been to St. Kitts and St. Lucia, and I love both places. And I cannot say I would rule that out. Especially, I'm glad you started off with the ones that I would never consider because of the money involved. And then we get down and say, well, okay, if I had to, I would maybe do one of these others. Because, of course, that was the key question would be, what is the cost involved? Now, if we went to the extreme of renouncing American citizenship, my understanding is that actually costs you a little, like you have to pay a few $1,000s or a couple $1,000s to the U.S. government to do that. Is that right?
Yeah, as I understand it, and as said, full disclosure, I'm not a tax guy, I'm an immigration guy, but yeah, there's a whole exit tax, there's a whole process you have to go through, and you need to take specific advice from people who do that, to make sure that you fiscally exit properly so that you don't have any surprises. But also, if you are looking to renounce, you want to make sure you've got a comparable citizenship elsewhere in the world. So most Americans who renounce either look for the European option, right? Because then it's sort of comparable in terms of having access. And if you're a citizen of Europe, you can still have travel visa free to the United States as well. So it's unlikely that someone would trade in a US passport for, say, a St. Lucian passport. They want to try and get like for like as much as possible. And, St. Lucia is a wonderful country, but it doesn't have the same weight, let's say, or pull as the United States.
So let's say I did nevertheless pursue that option with St. Lucia. What would that mean for me in practice? Would it mean that it just means that at any time I could, let's say I could have a property in St. Lucia and I could flee there anytime I want indefinitely. Is that the benefit?
Absolutely. And keep in mind, when the pandemic hit, a lot of the islands in the Caribbean shut their borders, right? And said, unless you're a citizen, including St. Lucia, and they said, we're not letting you in, unless you're a citizen. So if you're in the US and you're scrambling saying, look, I have a house there, that I bought 5 years ago for lifestyle, but I'm still coming in as a visitor, they won't let me in and I can't live in my house. However, if you had citizenship, then they have to let you in by virtue of the fact that you are a citizen of St. Lucia.
Yeah, okay. It's interesting, by the way, this is not the point, but it's interesting that they've had just a couple dozen cases on the entire, it's about 180,000 population. I know more about St. Lucia than I should. It's bizarre that I happen to. It's just a coincidence. but they've had a couple of dozen cases and 0 deaths, and yet they basically crushed their tourism industry And then they said, all right, well, people can come in this certain bubble. Well, there are about 10 island nations will allow people in from. Now they've liberalized it a bit more. You can come in, but you have to have a clean bill of health to come in. And even then, we're going to confine you to a resort. And by the way, being confined to a St. Lucian resort is not the worst sentence in the world. I mean, you could have a very, very nice time.
Absolutely, I'm very fond of St. Lucia, and speaking to people in their in the tourism industry there. I mean, the way that, as you say, if you're confined to a resort, if you're going in, you can't leave the property. There's very clear guidance of what the staff have to do in terms of, changing clothes, the showering, the hygiene and everything, exiting and entering the resort as well. So everything is very controlled because, the Caribbean islands are so dependent on tourism. And, when COVID hit, they're right in the middle of, they were in their high season. So right now, all the hotels were closed up until maybe 6 weeks ago, and so they've really been hit hard. So they're looking for different ways to attract foreign direct investment into their islands, and so these economic citizenship programs are a bit of a lifeline for them.
Yeah,
because it is funds that come straight in. It can go to COVID relief packages. In some cases, it's just covering government payroll. It's there's some things that they've got their bills they got to pay. And, they've got to find ways to reallocate funds to cover that. And, it's not just in St. Lucia, but, all of the islands in the Caribbean. And those who have the citizenship program have a bit of an advantage because they're getting that influx of capital through this program.
I realize this isn't the point, but it was interesting. I guess I don't understand economics as much as I thought. Given the desperation that the hospitality industry is experiencing right now, I thought this very high-end resort that I like in St. Lucia would be having a fire sale. I could get there for nothing. No, it's the same. So I don't know. I don't understand why that is, but somehow they're making that work. So the thing is, so would this mean then if I pursued an option like this, but I still spent, I bet there are people who pursue this kind of option who nevertheless spend the bulk of their time in the U.S., but this is a kind of an insurance policy, or do most of these people, they want to keep a foothold in the U.S., but they spend most of their time in the new country?
Yeah, it depends. You're seeing more of this digital nomad profile now where people can run their business from anywhere in the world, right? And so, they say, well, look, if things are getting a little bit sketchy in the US, why don't I just go and sit in my place in St. Lucia and I can manage my business from there? And so for people who have that luxury to be able to do so, I think you're seeing that happening more and more. But once you're a citizen, there's no residency requirements. You can get your citizenship today, don't go there for 20 years, and then you turn up and you're straight in as a citizen with all the privileges that entails. So, many people from the US will often use the Caribbean programs as a 2-for-1, where they'll buy a property for lifestyle, but then use that purchase as the vehicle to qualify for economic citizenship. Because, people in the Northeast, and they're in New York, they're in Boston, it's February, it's cold, and they're saying, well, let's just head down to the villa in Antigua, and we'll hang out there for a while. And when they're not using it, it's going into a rental pool and they're getting some return on that investment. So, for the American, because geography does play a part here, right? And Americans are quite used to traveling to the Caribbean and having holidays there. So there's a familiarity that goes with it as well. But the point you touched on earlier, Tom, about it being an insurance policy, I think here is key. Because, the sort of what if scenario is happening right now. It's not something that might happen or it'll never happen. It's impacting people on a daily basis in ways they never imagined. And so it's saying, look, if there's a second spike, if there's something else that happens, if the economy doesn't come back as we hope it will, I need to know I have an option to protect myself and to protect my family. And that's why I think people are looking at this as a real option, because it's not cost prohibitive for a lot of people, but it does give you a lot more peace of mind knowing that it's in your back pocket if you need it.
Well, it would be nice if I had a property there that, as you say, I could be, let's say, renting it out or doing something with it while I'm not using it. But the thing is, to me, the value of it would be that I could go there at the drop of a hat. Whereas if I were renting it out to someone for some specified period of time, I couldn't go. I could at least get on the island at the drop of a hat, but not in that property.
Yeah, that would be however you manage the property. I agree, but it's the point is you get access to the country, and if it means you have to rent something, that's just unfortunate. But it's the key element is you're actually in the country and you're safe, and that you've got access to enter.
Now, what are the sort of things or perils or pitfalls maybe that Americans trying to do something like this need to know about and avoid?
Well, I mean, it's a pretty straightforward process. There is, they all have pretty thorough due diligence processes. So, if you do have any criminality in your background, you're unlikely to get through. That's pretty clear. So, they'll also look at your source of wealth, your source of funds to make everything's been illegally acquired, etc. And again, that's all pretty standard for any type of investor application that would be made. But, there's not a lot of pitfalls because once you're granted, like I said, you have the right to come and go as often or as little as you want. So it's what we're finding as we're speaking to a lot of, wealth planners and family offices and all of this. This is becoming more and more a necessary tool in the toolbox, when you're looking at someone's overall structure and portfolio, because it's not something that people have always considered. And, what Will and I are finding as we're speaking to a lot of people in the US, it's just not in the psyche, of the American client. It's different if you're in the Middle East, if you're in Asia, if you're in Africa, where, you come from a country where your passport is very weak when it comes to travel. If you're from Pakistan, you can only go to 32 countries without getting a visa. South Africa is under 100, Lebanon's about 40. So these people, it's part of their life. They've always grown up with the problem of the quality of their nationality, and where Americans haven't. You used to be able to travel. You could travel 184 countries visa free, but now, with all these restrictions being imposed, you're realizing that the almighty American passport isn't as strong as it used to be, and how Americans are being received globally is not as favorable as it used to be either. So this is just saying, look, if I had to go to Europe, instead of flying or trying to apply as an American, maybe I'm going to do it as a citizen of St. Lucia, right? And then it's based on that citizenship that you're making your application, and that may open up more doors than what you may currently have as an American.
Yeah, Chris, I think that's really important. The U.S. passport, having the European visa, residency visa in there is maybe before COVID, that was okay and good. But now I think the extra insurance is to make sure you have the second citizenship and then get your residency visa in the new passport, even while you keep your U.S. citizenship. It just gives you so many more options.
Yeah, and I think, Will, it's worth maybe giving a quick summary of your situation, because you're probably one of the more forward-thinking Americans when it comes to making sure you've got access to the world.
Yeah, Tom. So, I'm an American attorney, do immigration work, and have been involved in a number of startups. I've been living in Asia for the last 10 years, and I know it's just gotten tougher everywhere. Singapore used to be easy to get a work permit to go and live there, much more difficult than it used to be. New Zealand, where I'm a resident, is almost impossible to get a work visa. You can do it, but they make you jump through a bunch of hoops. They've actually closed all visa applications until 2021. And over the last 20 years, they've taken the investor class visa from $500,000 New Zealand dollars to $3 million. So it's just getting tougher. And, I just think any American that wants to consider this needs to do it now. And it is sort of an insurance hedge and just something in your portfolio. You hope you don't need to use it, but it's an option if you do need to use it.
Well, let's say I have a passport from St. Lucia. Now, I grant you, as you say, St. Lucia doesn't have the heft that the United States does, but it also doesn't have as many COVID-19 cases as the U.S. does. It has essentially none at all. Does that mean that if I were in possession of that passport, it would be easier for me to get into Europe now than if I tried to use my American passport?
Absolutely.
Reading, the news, it changes daily. In the United Kingdom, for example, at the moment, they set up these air bridges, and, St. Lucia is one of those that gives you the access to the United Kingdom by virtue of that citizenship. Others, I think now from memory, I think France, Spain, and Greece are having those bridges closed because they've had some spikes in terms of their cases. So it's always a moving target, in terms of what countries will have that privilege. But yes, if you go on I was looking at it actually yesterday. St. Lucia is still one of the approved countries, as are Antigua, a lot of the Caribbean countries, because the virus isn't there. The number of incidents, the number of deaths, the number of cases, the risk factor of someone coming in from that island is minimized because it's just not prevalent on the island.
Well, to some extent, the answer to this question is obvious. They contact a lawyer like you, but let's flesh out a little bit. What exactly would an American need to know or do, or how do they get the process started? What do they need to think about? What are their first steps?
Well, I think that the first step was we need to understand more the motivations of the client. So we'll do, between Will and myself, we'll sit with them and we'll virtually sit with them, I should say, and get an understanding of why they're looking to do this, what their timescales are, what their budget is, and any other factors that could direct them to one program over another. To give you an example, in not as relevant for American clients, but in Grenada, they have a unique situation that they're a treaty country with the US as it relates to the E2 visa, which is an entrepreneur visa coming into the US. So unless you're a citizen of a treaty country, you can't apply under this visa category. And there are many big countries that are not treaty countries, places like Brazil, like South Africa, for example. So, if someone's listening who's a Brazilian and wants to use the E2, they could apply to Grenada, get economic citizenship there, and then use the Grenada citizenship to apply to the United States under the E2 visa. So it gives a different routing, depending on someone's situation. Grenada also has visa-free privileges to China. So if someone says, look, that's an important country for me to go to, then they may steer themselves more towards that one over, say, one of the others. So again, it will depend on the needs of the client and what they're looking after. Same again, if we're talking about renouncing, they may say, well, look, I want a European option. So talk to me about Malta, talk to me about Cyprus, those types of things.
Let's see, which one of it? I guess it was Will who sent me the Washington Post article. This is from just about a month ago, so in late July 2020. And the headline is, "The latest trend among wealthy American travelers, ? Buying another country's citizenship." So that, first of all, that's not something I really knew about because I'd never looked into it. It never was going to apply to me. Didn't matter. I never investigated it. Is this really an option only for wealthy Americans? I mean, what about somebody of modest means? Does he have any option at his disposal to do something like what we're describing?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the unfortunate impacts of this recession we're in is that the mass affluent are the ones who have been hit the hardest when it comes to having, discretionary income that they could use for one of these programs. I think your high net worth, your ultra high net worth applicant is going to be fine. They're going to be able to find the liquidity. But the mass affluent are the ones that are going to be hit the hardest. So, if we're looking, a single person all in is going to be less than 150,000 US, to get into Dominica or St. Lucia. And then, it goes up proportionally depending on the size of your family. Antigua and Barbuda, for example, is probably the most cost efficient for a family of 4. So again, if price is an option, then we can look and see which one is most cost effective for the size of the family. But yeah, I mean, at the beginning of the show, we spoke about, Cyprus being, 2.5 million euros. So if that's outside of the means of certain applicants, then they have to look at the lower end, which is going to be in the Caribbean.
Okay. What other issues do we need to cover related to this to make sure that we've hit it thoroughly?
Well, I think one of the things is healthcare, because that's becoming more, more of a relevant topic for people when they're looking at a second jurisdiction in which to get their status. Because, they're saying, well, look, and this is all obviously related to the pandemic. So if they're saying, look, I don't want to be in the US, I need to be somewhere where my family will be safe and I have access to healthcare, over and above things like communications and, good internet and all that type of things, they need to know that if they're going to be somewhere for 6 months, that they've got, decent healthcare. So this is where, places like the Cayman Islands have been, very popular, and even some of the other European jurisdictions. I'll give you an example. We were speaking to a gentleman out of Nigeria who is, a wealthy guy and was quite used to getting his medical treatment done either in Switzerland or in London, and then he never had status. So suddenly the pandemic hit and he couldn't travel anywhere. And then he was subject to the Nigerian healthcare system. And he was like, geez, I wish I had my status, somewhere in Europe so I could continue to have access, just at least to get into a country and benefit from the quality of healthcare that Europe would offer. So those are real situations that people are looking at. And Tom, I wanted to sort of throw in another sort of scenario here, which is outside of the whole sort of COVID situation. But prior to, a lot of Americans would be applying for these programs, when we talk about insurance, but it's also for high profile Americans or, senior business people that travel frequently and maybe travel to countries where Americans are not that welcome. So, for example, if you're checking into a hotel, they always ask for a copy of your passport. And so, maybe you say, okay, well, here's my passport from St. Lucia. nobody cares, right? But if it's an American, they may say, you don't know if the person behind the desk is selling a list saying, hey, there's an American in room 12. If there's a St. Lucian in room 12, nobody cares. It doesn't raise a flag. So people like to have that just as a second option, as I said. And sometimes if you're traveling to sensitive parts of the world, unfortunately, Americans sometimes have, can be red flagged as being a person of interest. And so, to the point, we speak with firms that specialize in kidnap insurance and all that stuff, and these are the types of things that people can do to mitigate any potential issues going forward.
Good grief, I would not have thought of kidnap insurance. What are we talking about there?
Well, that's it. I mean, depending where you go. I mean, if you go to volatile places in the world, and, I was probably about 10 months ago, someone asked me to go to Caracas in Venezuela, to speak to people there. And I was like, no way. Unless you're, if you go in there as a gringo, you're an immediate target, right? And, right at that time, obviously things are still a little bit delicate there, but it just doesn't make any sense to go there or countries that have that similar profile, when it comes to security. And so unless it's absolutely essential, but the clients I speak to from Venezuela, I either meet them in Panama or I meet them in Miami. That's usually the easiest way to do it. But some people have to travel to sensitive parts of the world. We have clients that work in, the mining industry that are going to, some African countries, where they're working quite remotely. And, it's always a worry. So people have to make sure you cover every base as much as you can.
If I were to go the Caribbean route as opposed to Cyprus or Malta, let's say, what kind of time frame am I looking at there before I'm able to be, well, let's say have dual citizenship?
Well, the processing time is pretty quick. I mean, assuming there's no issues on your file, if it's a pretty straightforward file, it's around about 3 months from the date of submission. So if you allow maybe 6 to 8 weeks to prepare, because we have to get all of your documentation in place and, getting police reports and all that good stuff, you could be looking start to finish definitely under 6 months and usually a lot less. Let's say once it's in, the timescales are pretty predictable.
Wow. Okay. Well, I'm going to ask if people want to reach you guys to work with you on this. And we have no financial relationship. Will wrote to me and I thought this is a good episode topic, but naturally you guys specialize in this. So if people want to work with you on this or they're interested in it, how do they contact you?
Well, I think you have all of our contact details. Our website is latitudeworld.com and my email is christopher.willis@latitudeworld.com. And Will's is will.garner@latitudeworld.com. So, whether there's some show notes or some addendums that you can share if people want to contact us, that's certainly the easiest way.
Okay. Now, are there any parting thoughts that you have or anything that we should have covered but didn't that we want to hit before we wrap up for today?
No, I was just going to say that I think you've touched on this, Tom, that you'd never even considered or even knew that these things existed. And I think that's an important thing that Will and I are trying to do is sort of educate people that they do exist and there is real benefit to doing this. And, the reality check that people have now gotten as a result of this pandemic means that you've got to start planning and preparing for these types of eventualities. And this is a great addition to your strategy.
Yeah, I just second that. Americans have been very blessed and lucky. You look at Chinese people and Russian people the last 50 years. They've, if they're wealthy or they're highly educated, they were so restricted on their travel. And that's why they always put such a high importance on getting second residency and citizenship. They just want to have that freedom that I think we've been lucky to have and maybe taken for granted. But now it's reality that those freedoms aren't there.
Wow. Well, again, this is not an episode I expected to have to produce, but here we are, and I'm glad to have done it with you gentlemen. I'll link to your website. It's latitudeworld.com?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay, so I'll link to that on the show notes page, tomwoods.com/1723, for people who are interested in what you do. And thanks to both of you for answering some questions today.
Thank you very much for listening today. If you're interested in more information about second citizenship or residency, send us an email at info@latitudeworld.com or go to our website at www.latitudeworld.com. As well, don't forget to check our pages regularly for news and updates. Latitude, welcome to your world.